Okay, it's now 7 o'clock and we are going to begin the meeting. So good evening. Welcome to this meeting of Wokingham Borough Council's Executive. I'm Stephen Conway. I'm the leader of the council and executive member for affordable and social housing and partnerships, and I will be chairing this evening's meeting. Very warm welcome to all of you. Could you please ensure that any mobile devices or mobile phones are switched off? If you're participating via Teams, when you're not speaking, we'd be grateful if you could mute your microphones. Please also note the meeting is currently being webcast live. So before we begin, I just think it's important that I introduce you to everyone who's present here. And I'm going to start with the officers who are arranged behind me. I'm going to, I think that's your right, isn't it? I think, yes, it's my left. Right over on the table there is David Allen, who's the head of the council's comms. Then we have Liam Olive and Priya Patel from Democratic Services, and they're servicing this evening's meeting. Then we've got Andrew Moulton, who's as you could see it, but you probably can't from where you are, Assistant Director of Governance. He's the council's monitoring officer. And then we've got Susan Parsonage, who's the Chief Executive, and Graham Ebers, who's the Deputy Chief Executive, but also the Chief Finance Officer. So those are the officers in the room. And I'm going to ask my colleagues to introduce themselves rather than me introduce them. And I'm going to start, just for a change, over on this side of the room with Ian.
Good evening, I'm Ian Shenton, Executive Member for Environment, Sport and Leisure.
Good evening, my name's Paul Fishwick. I'm Executive Member for Active Travel, Transport and Highways.
My name is Clive Jones. I'm the Executive Member for Business and Economic Development.
Good evening, I'm Lindsay Ferris. I'm the Executive Member for Planning and the Local Plan.
Good evening, I'm Prue Bray. I'm the Lead Member for Children's Services and the Deputy Leader of the Council.
Good evening, I'm Imogen Shepherd-Bay. I am the Executive Member for Finance.
Good evening, I'm Rachel Bishop-Firth. I'm Executive Member for Equalities, Inclusion and Fighting Poverty.
Good evening, I'm Sarah Kerr and I'm the Executive Member for Climate Emergency and Resident Services.
Good evening, I'm David Hare and I'm Executive Member for Health, Wellbeing and Adult Services.
Thank you, everyone. As I think we're all here, I think on that basis, asking for apologies is perhaps slightly superfluous. I don't think there are any, as we're all present. So we can move now to item 42 on the agenda, which is minutes of the previous meeting. And I think I'm right in saying, Sarah, you weren't at that meeting.
So I'll be abstaining on this.
Yeah, that's absolutely right and proper. All those who were at the meeting, are you happy to confirm that they're an accurate record? There are two meetings, I'm sorry. It's the 27th of July, but also the extraordinary executive meeting on the 24th of August. Is everybody happy to approve both those sets of minutes? Please show, and that's everyone who was present. Thank you. If we then move on to item 43, declaration of interests. Are there any interests anyone wishes to declare? Imogen.
I wish to declare an interest on items 51 and 54. This is because I work for a company that sells and supports modern workplace technology, which includes the most widely used tools for remote working. It's not pecuniary, but it's more of a personal interest, and I thought I'd better declare it anyway. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Imogen. Lindsay.
I have to declare an interest on agenda item 54. As the Executive Member for the Local Plan, I cannot be involved in any discussions that may be linked to that area, and I will be leaving the room.
Thank you, Lindsay. So you will actually absent yourself when we come to that item on the agenda. That's I think, right and proper. Thank you. So I'm going to just make a very brief statement, if I may, and it's really to take this opportunity to update the executive on progress with the community vision last evening, I attended a community vision steering group, which is made up of representatives from business, the voluntary sector, health providers, faith groups, the university and the youth council, as well as council officers. The leaders of the different political parties have a standing invitation to attend. The steering group is very ably chaired by Nick Fellows of the Wokingham Volunteer Centre. After a lot of work with the different stakeholders, we now want to involve the wider community and seek their views on priorities. Our Engage platform will be used to promote 2 questionnaires, one short and punchy, and one somewhat more detailed. They're now on Engage and will be there until the 6th of November. We've already begun to speak with community groups and use other forms of gathering views, including things like this, which is, you can't probably see from where you are, it's a hard copy postcard, literally, which would enable people who can't necessarily access Engage to be able to also give us their views. And I want to thank Jackie Whitney and her officer colleagues for all the work they're putting in to make sure that the process of community engagement moves forward. And I want to thank also all the steering group members for giving up their time and showing great commitment to making this a genuinely co-authored community vision. The enthusiasm and creativity of the steering group is incredibly heartening and demonstrates what can be achieved by working in a partnership of equals. That's all I want to say.
I'm terribly sorry, Stephen. I have just realised I need to declare an interest in item 52, which is the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. Because I'm a trustee of Kaleidoscopic UK, which is a charity that works on domestic abuse and domestic violence. And although violence against women and girls and domestic abuse are not the same thing, there is a personal interest there.
Thank you for doing that, Prue. I don't think that's going to require you to leave the room, and I think you would still be able to participate in any discussion that we have and the vote at the end. But thank you for making that clear. Okay. We now move on to public question time. And the first question is from Colin Watts. Would you like to come up here, Colin, and make yourself comfortable? And if you can, when you're ready to speak, just, I think you probably know the drill.
Yeah.
So if you could ask your question.
Good evening. Good evening, Lindsay. Good evening. You have repeatedly outlined a strategy as regards the local plan update that is based on the housing target for Wokingham Borough Council being reduced as a result of government changes to the National Planning Policy Framework, specifically a reduction to the housing target to take into account historic over-provision of housing in Wokingham. No changes to the NPPF have yet been published by the government, yet now Wokingham has stated that it will publish a proposed submission plan in November. Given the absence of changes to the NPPF, should we therefore assume that the revised plan to be published in November will be based on the existing housing target of 768 dwellings per annum?
Thank you, Colin, for your question. As you know, we have sought to engage with ministers in respect to national planning policy reforms. In December 22, the government published proposed reforms. Aspects of proposals reflected our ask, such as the ability to take account of passed over delivery as housing, as you just mentioned. We have cautiously welcomed the proposed reforms, but continue to lobby for further changes, such as how housing need is calculated and distributed spatially across England. Whilst the government indicated they would respond to consultation responses on the reforms in the spring, the messaging now suggesting a response in the autumn. The delay is disappointing, and we will keep reminding ministers of our views. Despite the government's delays, we are continuing to progress the local plan with an updated programme approved by Executive in July. This proposes the publication of the proposed submission plan in November this year, followed by submission to the Secretary of State in 24 and examination in public thereafter. Our programme assumed the government's reforms would be published in time for us to reflect on them before confirming the proposed submission plan. If the government reforms are delayed further, we will consider the consequence of this for our programme at that time.
Colin, do you have a supplementary? I suspect you do.
Yes, please. So just to be clear, if the government has not announced changes to the NPPF by November, will you delay publication of the updated plan? Because surely that would be the best thing to do.
That would be the logical answer to how we would be progressing, because it is so important for this borough to take advantage of that change. If that change of over provision, which is nearly 2,000 homes here in Wokingham Borough, that is quite a considerable number of extra homes that we do not believe we should be having to deliver. And so the answer would be we would have to see what happens at the time, and we would be moving on the looking to have the changes from the government before progressing.
Thank you, Colin. The next question is from Gary Cowan. I think Gary's online. Oh, I'm sorry. Apologies. I've jumped the gun. It's Peter White, and Peter is online. Peter, you have a question. You ready? Okay, if you'd like to ask your question of Ian.
Yeah, I think my question got slightly superseded by certain announcements yesterday, but I'll ask it anyway. So biodiversity net gain is soon to be introduced. Can Wokingham Borough Council confirm that this legislation and the need for developers to make good their biodiversity destruction of local habitats are at the forefront of the new local plan, and remediation will be local to the area of development, not off-sited to already more biodiverse areas of the borough?
Thank you, Peter, for your question. As you say, delivery of biodiversity net gain in association with new development will become mandatory in coming months, apparently, and will strengthen the current protection for biodiversity in the planning process. Biodiversity net gain approach will be in addition to the existing planning protections for designated sites, habitats and species. All councils will be required to use a standard biodiversity calculator published by Natural England to assess the impact of a development proposal on biodiversity. This allows for off-site biodiversity improvements outside of the planning application area. Any off-site improvements proposed beyond both the local authority and relevant national character areas have a lower value, providing an incentive for local biodiversity improvements. To facilitate local biodiversity improvements, our emerging local nature recovery strategy will identify areas, priorities and opportunities for nature recovery. This will help focus where actions to recover nature for us will be more effective and deliver better outcomes overall. Turning to the emerging local plan, councils are able to set a higher target for biodiversity net gain through the plan making process. This can only be achieved, however, where there is sufficient justification and where it is possible to demonstrate that the additional cost would not affect the viability of development when taking account of all the other asks, such as the provision of infrastructure and affordable housing. We are looking at whether this is possible. Now, as you hinted, that is the answer that was prepared until 36 hours ago, when the government dropped yet another bombshell on us by once again delaying an important piece of legislation. As you rightly intimated, they have pushed back the biodiversity net gain, which was due to become effective from November. We were ready to implement, despite the fact the government was not ready with its legislative instruments. We are still ready to implement when they get around to it. I have said before publicly that this government is the most corrupt, dishonest and incompetent in this country's history. It is now the most damaging in this country's history in terms of our climate emergency with recent events and our biodiversity. And they should be ashamed, and anyone who continues to support this government should be ashamed of what they're doing.
Peter, do you have a supplementary you want to ask?
I do, yes. So yes, the government has seen fit to postpone biodiversity net gain legislation until some future time. It's also been reported that most public sector planning departments were actually not prepared for the legislation, many of them citing lack of expertise. and many actually welcome the delay. So can Woking Borough Council just confirm that whether they welcome the delay or not? And if the updated local plan, soon to be into consultation, now puts biodiversity at risk due to the legislation that would enforce biodiversity remediation being shelved?
I think you can probably guess from Ian's first answer that what he's probably going to say on this, but I'll let him come in.
Yes, I think I said in my previous answer, we were ready to implement. Other public sector areas may not have been. In terms of what it does with biodiversity in the local plan, we will make every effort to at least meet the government's minimum standards. And we will put whatever protection in that we can.
Thank you very much, Peter. Good to see you again. Now, I think we now move on to a question from Gregor Murray. Gregor's not in the room, and I don't. Is he on screen? I don't see him. I think we will have to give Gregor a. He's not. Doesn't seem to be here, so I think we'll have to send Gregor a written response, which I'm sure we'll be able to do. Okay, thank you very much. That, I think, brings to a close public question time. We move now on to member question time. And the first question, I'm sorry, Gary, for getting you ready to ask your question a bit too early. But the first question, the member question time, is from Gary Cowan. I can't actually see you, Gary. It's a slightly strange vision.
No, I've had problems with this before. I see when I click on the camera and I'm shaving, you see me. When I click on the camera and want to speak, you can't. So my apologies. So I'll just have to ask the question standing in my name.
Thank you, Gary. That's good of you. I must admit I can't hear you that well either. I certainly can't see you, but I know you're there, so that's good. Thank you. And thank you for your question, Gary. As you correctly state in your question, the Conservatives put Hall Farm with 4,500 new dwellings in their draft local plan. We inherited that plan and have been seeking to improve it. You're not correct, however, to say that we've done nothing on the local plan. On the contrary, our planning officers and my colleague, the executive member for planning and the local plan, have been working very hard on the many outstanding matters that need to be addressed before a final version of the local plan can be submitted to the judgment of the Inspectorate Public Inquiry. You know that I cannot comment on individual sites until Council, with all the relevant evidence available to it, debates the final version of the local plan. At that stage, you will be able to form a judgment on whether we have improved on the Conservatives' draft plan, which I should add they were keen that we submitted as it stood without any amendments. Have you got a supplementary question, Gary?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can just about hear you, Gary. You try to ask your supplementary, and if I don't hear anything, I can ask you to repeat it.
I'll speak a bit louder. I did submit this question to Democratic Services on the 3rd of August, but in the light of the comments you made in the papers a fortnight or last week, I think it has more significance. I sat on many planning committees with you, and I had the greatest respect for your superb, deep planning knowledge, eloquence, and professionalism. So I was not at all that surprised to read your comments in last week's paper. You said the government sets council housing targets, and you added that the government tells councils how many new homes they must plan to accommodate and give planning permission for a 15-year local plan. And you actually say the words 15 years. And I would suggest you're 100% correct. So why are you supporting a local housing plan, which is a plan to build 2,300 houses in the period 2040 to 2055, which are not demanded by the government? And my question simply is why? Thank you.
Thank you for your supplementary, Gary. I did hear you, I'm pleased to say, and I particularly noted the very kind comments you made at the beginning. Of course, I heard those very well. I did hear the latter part of your question too, which I have to say I've partially covered in my answer to you already, which is that I can't comment on individual sites until the council, with all the evidence before it, debates the final version of the local plan. At that stage, I think you will be able to make a decision on the point that you raise. I don't think I could say anything more than that at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary. I was going to say it's good to see you, but unfortunately I can't. But I hope you are well, and look forward to seeing you at some time soon. Thank you.
Yeah, you will.
Thank you. So the next question is from Charles Margetts, and I think I did see Charles is online, and I can see you. Marvellous. Good evening, Charles. I hope you're well.
Good evening. I'm fine, thank you.
Good. Would you like to ask your question of Imogen?
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, my question is, the council owns significant amounts of offices and retail space in Wokingham, some of which are empty or are let at minimal or low rents to charities. What plan does the council have to get maximum value for the taxpayer from these assets?
Okay. Sure. Despite the challenging economic conditions and some recent closures of individual units, in general, Wokingham Town Centre bucks the wider economic picture and has relatively high occupation rates. With regard to the property in the council's ownership, the regeneration portfolio, including Elmsfield and Peach Place, has an occupancy rate of over 95%. The investment portfolio within the town centre has only one vacant unit within it, and that's due to a recent business closure. Later this year, part of the council's adult services team with its NHS partners will take occupation of the offices at Resource House in Denmark Street. With this in mind, this building was adapted for wheelchair access, ramps and rails as part of a planning application in May this year. So I would certainly refute your opening assumption that there is significant levels of council-owned empty offices and retail space in the town. Some of our otherwise empty offices units are being used by charities in the short term. It's a standard property management approach and has a double positive for the council because it provides premises for the charitable organisations in the heart of the town without them incurring commercial property costs, and therefore supports the charities in delivering important services and support for our residents. The occupation of these buildings by charities also helps the council mitigate business rates and utility costs, which the council would have to pay if the buildings were just left empty. The council is continually reviewing and assessing our long-term permanent use of buildings occupied by our voluntary and charity sector partners for either service use or commercial opportunities as they come along through the market. For example, the old Marks and Spencer's building on Peach Street, which is currently occupied by Forces Support, will be considered by this executive this evening as a potential new headquarters building for the council. Other buildings are also being considered for future council services. For instance, within the site promotions report, again that is due to be considered by the executive this evening, office buildings Rubra 1, 2 and Alba at Mulberry Business Park on Fishponds Road are being proposed for residential development, which could be specialist housing to meet our identified service needs. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, Imogen. There was just a supplementary on that, if I may.
Yes, please go ahead, Charles.
Thank you. I note your comments about the building on Denmark Street. You'll forgive me, next to the car park. You'll forgive me for not knowing how much of that space that relates to, but perhaps you could confirm. Officers had previously outlined to me that that building was 23,000 square foot. You know, is the plan you've just announced basically for adult services to take possession of it? Is that all of it, or is just a part of it? And if so, what percentage roughly?
Resource House is the building that's above the hairdressing salon and the Chinese supermarket and that area. So that's where they're going in there. I mean, at the moment in the police station, we have first days are using that for and they have their school uniforms in it. And the library down the other end is being used by Share, who are largely storing furniture, and other charities are using it as well. So there's subletting parts to other charities. So the buildings are in use. And there is a whole multitude of things that we're looking at for those other buildings at this point in time. But until we've worked it all through, we're not going to be very clear about it. But they are being, there's plans going ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. And we move seamlessly to Rebecca Margetts, who was also online, but not sharing the same computer.
No, we definitely don't want to be in the same room together.
No, well, it's good to see you.
Thank you,
Rebecca.
Stephen.
Could you ask your question? I think it's of me, so could you ask it?
Thank you. The previous administration had been in discussion with local groups about the running of the community centre at the new Arborfield Green Village Centre. I've not heard any progress with these discussions, or if the groups previously interested are still involved. Please can you give me an update on when the full community centre will potentially be open?
Thank you for your question, Rebecca. A reserved matters application, which includes the community centre, will be presented to the Planning Committee on the 11th of October. If approved, a task and finish group will be formed. The group will work collaboratively on how and when the project will be delivered, alongside outcomes that will meet the needs of the local community, following community engagement. The group will include CREST and key stakeholders from the community, such as town and parish councils and local community groups. The new community building, if progressed as outlined in the planning application, should be completed in 2026. Do you have a supplementary, Rebecca?
I do, Stephen. So thank you for that, and it's good to hear that there's an outline of where we're going. And obviously, residents have been told lots of things, and they keep given dates which just slip and slip. So, how will the council try and ensure that CREST do deliver on this essential building for the community?
Thank you for that supplementary, Rebecca. Obviously, we first have to get the planning permission granted before we can be confident about any delivery dates. And all I can say, there's been very good engagement between our officers and CREST to try and move this project forward. I know you're interested in it. I know many people are really keen to see this. We're very aware of that, and we are doing all we can to make sure it happens.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, we now move on to a question from Alison. Hello, Alison, good to see you. And you're here in person, so thank you for that. And you have a question you want to ask of Paul.
Good evening, Paul. The Liberal Democrat-led administration seems determined to deter visitors from visiting our towns. Local business owners already fear for the future as customers choose to go elsewhere to avoid paying the highly increased car park charges in our towns. Several businesses are close to shutting, and some already have, citing lack of footfall brought about by the large parking charge increases, this being a major contributor to their demise. We understand that Liberal Democrat councillors are well advanced in putting together proposals to implement on-street parking charges in Wokingham town centre, including identifying sites for the curbside payment machines. Will you carry out a full consultation with residents before you make a decision on such proposals?
Hasn't come on. Question.
Paul, your microphone hasn't come on.
There we go, we're on. Thank you, Alison, for your question, and good evening. The short answer to your question is yes. There would be a full public consultation before any major change to on-street parking arrangements. The council has for many years been considering on-street parking as part of a wider parking management strategy for the borough, which would help relieve some of the existing pressure in residential roads and provide a fair approach to managing on-street parking restrictions, making it fairer for all residents. And before any of these are progressed, we would carry out a full public consultation and approval process prior to anything being introduced. As the council has already advised, the web page mock-up seen by the newspaper was part of earlier work being done to consider the potential review of on-street car parking policy in the future. There are no detailed plans for any changes to on-street parking at the present time. And if there are any changes in the future, these will be fully consulted on. The longer answer is that many shops and other businesses across the country are suffering because of the dreadful state of the economy. Crippling high mortgages and consistently high prices have combined to create something called the cost of living crisis. What this Conservative created crisis means is that everybody, people, businesses and local councils included, are struggling to make ends meet and having to make tough choices. A tough choice we made was to increase car parking charges for the first time in over 5 years. A charge that would have been needed if the previous, would not have been needed if the previous administration had made sensible, small incremental price increases when they had the chance. Instead, they left the car park service unable to cover its costs, which caused a drain on other resources. The tough choices for some people this winter will include whether to eat or heat. In other words, do they miss a meal so they can warm a room? They will also have tough choices about mortgage payments, fuel bills, and how they afford the most basic of purchases. In times such as these, it is sad but not surprising that some shops are struggling across the country. However, here in Wokingham Borough, our initial findings suggest they are not struggling due to the car parking charge changes. We will complete a full 3-month review shortly, but early data shows usage of our car parks has actually gone up since the charges increase. We need to complete our 3-month review to understand these figures fully, but these preliminary figures show it is certainly premature to suggest footfall has been hit by parking charge changes.
Sure, you've got a supplementary, Alice. Paul, sorry, turn the microphone off.
Thank you for your answer, Paul. I'd like some assurance that when we have a consultation, that we have very fair, open, unbiased questions, and that the results of the consultation are carefully considered by the executive to take account of what our residents do feel, because we have had previous consultations where, you know, what the residents feel and what is decided are quite different things. And I'd also like to invite you to come to Woodley Precinct and meet some of the independent business owners, who are very, very concerned. You know, they look at the amount of money they're taking now that they were taking previously. And I'm not making this up. I'm not trying to be dramatic. Our local business owners do feel threatened. They are very afraid for the future. Thank you.
The highway service is one of the most busiest in the council. There are lots and lots of changes that people request on an annual basis, and we undertake assessments on those. We do an awful lot of background work, and we go out for consultation. And an example of that is over the 200 parking restriction requests that we get in. We consult on those. We consult on pedestrian crossing areas, speed limit changes. So we undertake consultations all the time. As I said before, we would undertake, if we decide to go ahead with any on-street car parking, a full consultation. Also, what I said in my statement or response back to you was that the data is currently showing that there has not been a decrease at all due to the car parking charges. The number of tickets sold have increased when you compare like for like data in July and August. We're still waiting for the September figures to come in, but the figures at the moment show for July an 18,000 increase in ticket sales, and for August over 7,000. That is not small numbers, that is large, and that is comparing like for like data. And I think we need to look at the 3-month review, first of all, see what that data is. But as I said before, it's across the country where there are issues, and it's all down to this Conservative created crisis that we have now.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Alison. And Alison, if I could give you some assurance that we will make sure that the consultation responses on any consultation are taken properly into account. I'm sorry, I was just adding that I wanted to. Yeah, well, as now you're facing me, I think it probably be, I hope it'd be better. I just wanted to assure you that consultation responses will be taken fully into account before any decision is made by the executive.
I know I'm going to have a question, but our consultations with residents, could we make sure we're talking directly to businesses as well?
Well, I don't want to turn this into a debate. I was just offering some reassurance, but do make your point, Lindsay.
Clive and I visited Woodley at the time of the proposed changes, and we spoke to a lot of the businesses. I spoke to about 40 or 50 of them as we went around, and we understood about the increased charges, but they are relatively modest, 80p to £1, and for 1 hour and the like. So we didn't have the specific issues. We were looking at how they were affected by where they could park as people who worked there, that most of them had their own parking spaces, and we also inquired as to how we would deal with things. So we did go there to try and find out what the impact would be, and I understand that when there are increases, there is always an element of concern, but they are relatively minor for the vast majority of the charges, particularly for people for parking, whether it's 1 hour or 2 hours. The change is minimal, really.
For making an additional comment, but I don't think we were not allowed to have a debate. We just need to. I wanted to give some reassurance to Alison we would be taking seriously, but I think you've got the message. Thank you. If we could now move on, that. Yes, Nick at the back, can you hear us? You can. Oh, there we are. Okay. Alison must have been in an oral blind spot. Okay. We now have a question from Graham. Graham Howe. And Graham, I think, is online. Are you there, Graham? Good to see you.
Good evening, Stephen and
Good evening,
Executive.
Graham. Could you ask the question in your name, Graham?
Yes, please. So, following the vast amount of rhetoric by the ruling administration, which has been made in the local press and their campaigning publications, and the promise of an invitation to a roundtable discussion, would the executive member stop the sitting on the fence? And would he now explain in clear, concrete terms what we can convey to Wokingham's residents as to exactly what will be in the draft local plan and when it will be published for consultation? Thank you.
Lindsay?
I do have an answer, but I think I partially gave an answer in my supplementary to the previous question. No one is sitting on the fence. The programme for the local plan was approved by Executive in July. This proposes the publication of proposed submission plan in November this year, followed by submission to the Secretary of State in 2024 and examination in public thereafter. Whilst we wish to follow our programme, it assumed that the proposed government reforms to national planning policy will be published in time for us to reflect on them before confirming the proposed submission plan. Government initially indicated that they would respond in the spring. They are now talking about the autumn, and we've already waited a very, very long time for this government to get its act together. As you're aware, some of the proposed reforms could be very important to our communities, such as being able to take account of past housing over delivery. If the government reforms are not published very soon, we will need to consider the consequences for our programme. Let's hope the government gets its act together, but if not, we will need to consider the consequences on our programme. I would hope that any consequences would be modest. The alternative will be to proceed without taking account of matters that we know are important. I would be surprised if that's what you are advocating.
Graham, I'm fairly confident you'll have a supplementary.
Your confidence is well founded, Stephen. Thank you. So, you know, I'm a business guy, and in business, like a lot of our residents, we need numbers, timelines, and we need predictability. And the problem is that all the way through this debate on the local plan, there has been caveat after caveat, which is dependent on what happens in local government. But at some point or another, we, and I mean we, collectively, need to make decisions for our residents and doing things regardless of how the future may be. And so from that point of view, I would seek again to get from the current administration some predictability that we can give to our residents. You can shrug, Stephen, all you like, but that's what we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. But the just being reminded that the local plan started as long ago as 2016. So we're already 7 years. So I think talking about, I think the issue is that I have said to some of your colleagues, the most helpful thing that we can do is if you could persuade Mr. Gove, MP, to issue the NPPF proposed changes that he had in the draft document that was consulted on last December through to March. And in that, it clearly indicated that the government was considering taking account of over-provision from one local plan into the next. Wokingham Borough is one of a small number of councils across the country who are in that position. We have had correspondence from the government, which sounds hopeful, but we are dependent on that. And I would not want to move forward on a local plan where we have the possibility, the current figure is 1727 and the revised one is being worked out and may even be higher. I will not move forward on a local plan that puts nearly 2,000 houses extra into a local plan that if the government provided that change would enable that not to be developed. And I don't think you want an extra 2,000 houses up in Walgrave, would you?
Maybe it does.
Well,
if that was the question, well, that's not for me to answer. But anyway, Lindsay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the explanation that you have given.
Thank you, Graham. I'm sure you're aware of the answer I gave to Gary earlier on. The council itself makes the final decision on the local plan, and none of us, and that includes you as well as me and everyone here, none of us can be in the position to comment on individual sites until the council has before it all the relevant evidence so we can make a balanced judgment. That is the simple fact of the matter. And although I understand why you wish to fish for information, you know exactly what the situation is. It was the same situation under your administration. Thank you, Graham. It's been good to see you again. And now I think that brings to a close. Sorry, I'm getting into the habit of turning my microphone off, which is a bad habit. We're now moving on to substantive items on the agenda. And the first one on page 33 of your agenda, good night, Colin, is risk management policy and guidance. And this is Imogen who's going to present this to us.
Thank you, Stephen. Risk management is an important element of Wokingham's governance arrangements, and it shows our robust, transparent decision making. It is good practice for us to regularly review the risk management policy, and it strengthened our approach over recent years, acknowledged by our external auditors in their latest report for 2020-21. During the 2020-21 period, the council set up a risk champions group. This group is largely made up of assistant service directors who are directly involved with the identification of risks and updating the corporate risk register. This is a direct action which shows the council's commitment to embed an increased culture of risk management on a day-to-day basis. Work has been undertaken to align the corporate risk register to the council's strategic objectives, as well updating the risk residual risk after mitigation and the council's risk appetite for each risk. The report is thanks to the audit committee who reviewed this policy at their meeting in July and for their continuing scrutiny of the council's corporate risk register. Thank you very much. Oh, we also found that there was a typo on page 46.
I'm glad you drew that to everyone's attention.
It's Stephen Conway, not Stephen Covey.
I thought there might have been a coup that I hadn't.
No. Stephen is still our leader, and not Stephen Covey.
Yeah.
I
think we'll just need to correct that.
Yes.
In the papers, if we may, just for my peace of mind, if no one else is.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Imogen. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on this? I don't think there is. I think it's fairly straightforward. So the recommendation, as you can see on page 33, is that the executive is asked to approve the risk management policy and guidance, noting the comments made by Audit Committee on the 19th of July. All those in favour, please show. And that is unanimous. Thank you. Right, we now move on to the next item on our agenda, which is on page 69, Treasury Management Report. And it is again Imogen to present this.
Thank you again, Stephen. Okay, this is a Treasury Management Report. This is a particularly important report in the current financial climate, as it shows much of the detail about the current mid-year health of our council's financial debt management and cash investments. It is a busy report full of jargon, but I will try and translate the highlights into something most people can hopefully understand. However, if you really want to dive into council finances, this is a good report to read. During 2022-23 financial year, the council was able to reduce its general fund external borrowing from 196 million to 118 million, and the HRA external housing revenue account, external borrowing went from 67 million to 64 million, meaning our overall external borrowing went from 263 million to 182 million. With the pressures on our budget due to inflation, it was very important to reduce interest payments as much as possible. The general fund borrowing overall is lower than was forecast because the capital programme of council projects was either postponed, redesigned or cancelled throughout the year. This was necessary to deal with inflation and interest costs, the interest cost problems that we've all been recently facing. Internal borrowing has increased this year to protect the council from increased interest rates. This is mainly borrowing money when we need it from pots of money that are ring-fenced for projects that have not yet started, and other income sources such as rents and fees, which are received in advance of our spend. Despite the interest rates over 5%, we've managed to contain all of our 2022-23 loans with an average of 2.35%. So using this and money that the council already has is keeping our costs low. The council's level of net indebtedness at the 31st of March 2023 has reduced to 68 million from 72 million in 2022. This is what we would still owe if we used all of our cash balances to repay debt. So keeping it as low as possible is clearly a long-term benefit. On top of this, we have the value of our assets too, so buildings and such like. Investing the money that we have, so if we are not yet using it, is a sign of good treasury management. So we are open to lending this money to other local authorities and investment organisation offer for short-term loans. It is better to make the money work for us than just to leave it in the bank. The interest payments on these loans can be used to fund vital services for our residents. In addition to our treasury investments, the council receive an income from housing, local economy and regeneration assets. Again, this income is needed to fund the services that the council provides. Page 75 shows a table of what the investments the council has in place on the 31st of March 2023. It includes the money we have lent to 4 local authorities and their payment dates. This table also includes the loans to 3 different investment funds who are also providing us with an income. To reiterate, as local authorities are underwritten by central government, they are extremely low risk and very safe places for us to invest our money. Even when they have financial problems and have issued a Section 114 notice, they have to meet their financial obligations and no council has ever defaulted on a loan. So unlike a business, their financial status makes no difference to us as a lender when we lend them money. Page 76 shows a list of external loans that we have made, and many of these are from long time ago, going back to 2004. Mostly from other local authorities and Treasury in the form of public works, in the form of the Public Works Loan Board. There is a small amount from banks and similar funds. In summary, I think you can see that our Treasury management is doing well and we're bringing the finances in this area under better control than they have ever been for some time.
Thank you very much, Imogen, both for your commentary there and also for the work that you and all of our finance officers are doing to ensure that this good report was able to be submitted. So thank you. I'm sure we're all immensely grateful for that. So if we can move to the recommendations on page 69. I'm not going to read them out, but you can see them written there. Could you indicate whether you are in support of those recommendations? And that again is unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, we now move on to page 79 of the agenda. This is residential leasehold insurance renewal. And again, it's Imogen, it's fairly unremitting.
Sorry,
I meant for you, not for us.
Mix it up on the agenda a bit.
Well, we will be a little later on, but
anyhow,
over to you.
Residential leasehold building insurance renewal. Anyone who owns property will have noticed a sharp increase in building insurance premiums. This report mainly affects residents who have shared ownership or who have bought their property under the right to buy, but the property is still within a council-owned building, such as former council flats. Because they have to pay a share of the Because of this, they have to pay a share of the building's insurance. In 2021, building insurance for these properties was an average of £320 per leaseholder. This year, the premiums are now in the range of £300 to £650 range, with the council paying a higher excess in order to smooth out the rise. But the insurers will not only allow this for 1 year. Sadly, since Grenfell Tower, many high-rise local authority buildings have been uninsurable and many insurers have pulled out of the market. We do not have these kinds of buildings in our property portfolio, but it is having a knock-on effect to the insurance prices of shared ownership buildings. The council is preparing to go with an open tender process for insurance and believes this process will provide the best possible value for leaseholders. These insurance costs are very likely to rise more than 10% for the next year per property. So we need to consult with the residents on this process and keep them well informed of what is happening. This report is here to give for the executive to give permission for the procurement team to begin this process.
Thank you very much, Imogen. Before I take you to the recommendation on page 79, just a reminder, this is really approving a request to conduct a competitive procurement exercise, which is designed to give us the best value for these council leaseholders, ultimately for these council leaseholders in these rather difficult times, and we will do everything as a council we can to secure the best possible deal for our leaseholders. Could I just see all those in favour of this recommendation? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Right, we now move away from you for a moment, at least, Imogen, and we're moving to what's slightly misleadingly entitled Enhanced Partnership. It's actually to do with buses, and it's going to be Paul who will present this report on page 85 of your agenda.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, this is all about buses, the Enhanced Bus Partnership. There's a lot of documentation here, but in summary, first of all, I'd just like to say a very big thank you to the officers who put an awful lot of work into producing this documentation and working with the local bus operators. So a big thank you to them. So in summary, the revised bus service improvement plan sets out the council's vision and objectives for local buses. Following consultation and feedback from the DFT, which we worked with, when they fed back on the very first BSIP, we developed and then approved a second and the revised bus service improvement plan in January this year, which was published on the 27th of January. The enhanced partnership, though, is a legal document. It's a legal agreement between the Borough Council as the local transport authority and the local bus operators that operate within our area. It's aimed at delivering the BSIP, so that's the first part which we originally approved back in January, sets minimum standards and a framework for how any funding, that's any funding, grant funding or funding that comes from anywhere else, will be spent. There's 9 key objectives and they're set out on page 88. The Borough Council has received £400,000 of grant money from the DFT, but is subject to the publication and approval of the enhanced partnership by the 30th of September. So we need to publish it by Saturday. It should be noted, without the enhanced partnership, there is a risk to other central government funding grant, including that 400,000, as well as the bus service operator grant, which is worth 111,400 per annum. Statutory consultation has been undertaken with local bus operators, adjacent transport authorities and others, and they're all shown in the document ENC3 of the Enhanced Bus Partnership. And 2 responses came back. One of them was a very detailed response from Transport Focus, and the officers have responded to that. That's actually included in ENC4. ENC1 is the Enhanced Partnership Plan and Scheme. Very detailed, everything that we would like to do in there. And ENC2 is the Equality Impact Assessment. So I recommend approval of this Enhanced Partnership Agreement.
Thank you very much, Paul. And I would like to second your thanks to the officers involved, but also extend it to you. I know you've put in a lot of work too. I've got 2 colleagues who want to come in, but before they do, let me just say, I hope we are going to approve this because we're only just in time. It's the 30th of September very soon. We're on the 28th. So I saw Rachel first and then Sarah.
Super, thank you. I mean, I just wanted to say how really pleased I am to see this Enhanced Bus Partnership Plan. Access to affordable, reliable transport is absolutely essential to allow everybody to access work, education, healthcare, their social support networks. And buses are a lifeline to many residents, especially those living on low incomes, and to many younger and older residents, because people in those age brackets obviously are much less likely to drive. They're an essential part, therefore, of fighting poverty and fighting inequality. They're also a great example of how fighting climate change goes hand in hand with giving more options to everybody, and particularly to those living on low incomes. And I finally wanted to mention how the Park and Ride from TVP to the Royal Berkshire Hospital, which is now open to the public as well as to staff, has made visits to the hospital so much easier for those who are driving into Reading and have now much better options for parking and getting to the hospital more easily. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Rachel. That was very helpful. Sarah, you wanted to add something as well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Rachel's touched on it. I just wanted to highlight, obviously, the climate aspect of this. And this is obviously a fundamental part of our climate emergency action plan. And this is about providing choice for people as to how they travel, and also recognising that not everybody drives or owns a car, whether that's for cost of living reasons, whether that's health reasons, or all manner of reasons. But this is something that we're approving that is about providing choice, and it will help bring down our carbon emissions. And actually looking at the UK picture of where we are with climate mitigation, the area that has been made progress is in the electricity grid with more renewables. Transport, we've hardly scratched the surface. It's an area that needs vast improvement across the whole country. So I'm glad that we're leading the way in this. So thank you very much, Paul, and to the team, obviously Rebecca and Rob and everyone. They've done a great job.
Thank you, Sarah. That's absolutely right. Okay, I think we should move now to the vote. We don't want to miss the 30th of September deadline. So all those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. That's unanimous. If we could now move on then to page 167 on your agenda, and this is Woking Borough Council Future Office Provision. And I'm going to introduce this item. I think it's now pretty general knowledge that the council is seeking to make savings as a result of a very difficult financial position. This has prompted us to examine the opportunity to save money by moving out of our current very expensive to run HQ at Chute End. With new working methods, meaning that the building is rarely even a quarter full, it makes great sense to relocate to smaller and cheaper to run accommodation. Various alternatives have been considered and appraised. At present, the preferred option is to move to 28 to 38 Peach Street in Wokingham, the site of the former Marks and Spencers. And this will be subject, this preferred option will be subject to more detailed feasibility work before a final decision is made. But that is the direction of travel. And it's clear here that we want to agree in principle a review of our office accommodation provision, including the opportunities to relocate the headquarters. So you can see the various recommendations before you. There are 4 of them in total. I don't think we need to extend this very much further. Anybody want to add any comment? Imogen, did you want to say anything in relation to this?
I'm sure I can do. I mean, obviously, since COVID started, our staff have learned to make better use of the remote working tools.
Yes.
It's been very noticeable to our residents that Chute End offices are very much underused, and we're currently not using the top 2 floors of this building. There is more than enough room on the remaining 2 floors anyway. We still need places where residents can come and talk to Woking Borough Council staff, and some specialist places for meetings and storage. It'd be far more efficient to use smaller buildings that are cheaper to run. This process also gives us the opportunity to build workspaces that are more efficient and better suited to the needs of the climate emergency. Yeah. I know that this report also looks at potentials for smaller satellite locations, which may work better for our residents looking to access Woking Borough Council staff in other parts of Woking Borough. I would certainly support this too.
Thank you very much, Imogen. I think Prue wants to just say something briefly.
It's very brief. Just to clarify for people who haven't got the report in front of them online or watching on YouTube or whatever, this is not a decision to move to 28 to 38 Peach Street. This is a decision to put some money in so that officers can investigate further.
Exactly.
So we're looking at it. It may be that we end up somewhere else, depending on what this extra money generates. But that is the aim at the moment. It looks like the best option. And as Imogen said, there's also the consideration of whether we deliver our services in a hub model where the more services will be more accessible, more decentralised, so that people don't have to travel so far to get to our services and can actually receive them in their own communities, which is something I think we would very much like to see.
Yeah, that's been very helpful comments both from Imogen and Prue. This is really an item which is giving you an indication of what the current preferred option is, but that we are continuing feasibility work, and this is why we need to approve a supplementary estimate to pay for all of that detailed work. So could I ask for all those in favour to show? Thank you very much. Everyone appears to be in favour of that. Excellent. Thank you very much. So we now move on in our agenda to our next item, which is on page 181. And this is Violence Against Women and Girls Strategy 2023-26. And Sarah will be presenting or introducing this item. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. I just wanted to begin by, I don't know if everyone remembers when we had the executive meeting that we decided to proceed with developing a violence against women and girls strategy. That was the executive meeting where a member of the public verbally abused me outside this meeting. I don't know if people remember. And obviously, thanks to Jim Froon, who was actually there at the time and witnessed this and asked the person to leave, and to Susan actually for sitting with me while I was a bit of a blubbering wreck after that. But yeah, it's just to remind people that this abuse exists here in Wokingham. I was talking to a male friend the other day who didn't think it did. He didn't understand that in Wokingham, women and girls suffer violence. And again, I was reminded earlier this week on Tuesday, I was in a safe space and I got verbally abused by a man. And it, again, really shook me. This happens all the time. And it's quite often hidden. It's underreported. A lot of the time, women and girls fear going to the authorities because they're not necessarily believed. But it is not inevitable. It's really important that we have a strategic approach to this. It's because at the moment, so many women and girls, they actually stop living the lives they would choose to live for themselves because they want to avoid the violence and the abuse. And what I'm talking about here is this can be things like upskirting, it can be stalking, it can be bullying, it can be sexual assault, it can be rape, and in some cases it's murder. And the reasons why this happens is because of the deep-rooted misogyny we have in society that still exists, that objectifies women and girls. So this is not to say that violence and abuse doesn't happen to men and boys. We know it does. This is a very specific kind of violence and abuse that happens to women and girls because they're women and girls. This is gender-based, and it needs a very specific approach to it. There are things that already happen that are addressing this, but not enough. And this is about bringing that strategic, holistic approach, which will be brought together under the Community Safety Partnership with our other partner organisations such as the police and a lot of partner services as well. And this has been developed in conjunction with them. I just wanted to say a few words of thanks to certain people. So obviously to the officer team, to Phil and Narinder in particular, for putting all the work into this. It's been fantastic. To our partners as well that helped shape this, to the public through the consultation. And I'd like to make a special thanks to Louise Timlin as well, who really brought this forward to us and sort of helped us on our journey with this. And I wanted to say it's also quite timely. We've all seen what's happened with Lawrence Fox on GB News this week, and the comments he made about that female journalist are absolutely abhorrent. And some people say, well, freedom of speech and all of that. Freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequence. And his comments only serve those people that continue to objectify women, and his comments will have a direct negative impact on women and their safety. So I think it's absolutely right that he was suspended in that way. So what this strategy does, it now underpins a more detailed action plan that's going to be developed. That action plan is going to be developed with a victim survivor-led voice through that, looking at enhancing services that we have for people, as well as tackling the causes. And one of the things we're doing as part of this is the White Ribbon accreditation. And we're having our workshop soon to start looking much more in detail at that, which is about men being part of the responsibility. This isn't just about women, you know, dressing differently, taking a different route home. This is about actually men saying, no, we need to call out the misogyny that happens in society that leads to this. So I know I'm quite passionate about this.
You are indeed, I understand.
So you want to get the enhanced partnership plan in, I know, for the 30th. So, but
you did also, I think, suggest that you wanted to make an amendment.
Yes. So there is a slight amendment I need to make to the recommendations, and it is literally a tiny tweak. I'm just going to read out the recommendations. So the first, it's going to be 2 recommendations rather than 3, and 1 and 2 are amalgamated into 1. So it is to formally approve the Wokingham Violence Against Women and Girls Strategy 2023 to 26, subject to the strategy being presented to the Wokingham Borough Wellbeing Board and any further amendments arising being delegated to the Director of Place and Growth in consultation with the lead member. Okay, so it's about that actual delegation, which wasn't in the original recommendation. And then the second recommendation is what is currently the third recommendation in the report, which is request that the Wokingham Community Safety Partnership adopt the approved VORG strategy, with the Community Safety Partnership taking responsibility for the further development and oversight of the VORG strategy and action plan.
Thank you. Can I just make sure I've got this correct? So what in our agenda, in the printed agenda, is recommendations 1 and 2 are now going to be amalgamated. And just correct me if I get anything wrong. I think you were saying, Sarah, that this now will become formally approve the Wokingham Violence Against Women and Girls VORG strategy 2023-26, subject to the strategy being presented to the Health and Wellbeing Board with any amendments delegated to the Director of Place and Growth in consultation with lead member for approval.
Yeah, it was the term delegated that wasn't explicit in the original, which is why we've got
delegated to them for approval.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I hope that's okay with everybody.
No, that's absolutely fine. But I just wanted to make sure I got that right. And recommendation 3 is as it stands in the agenda.
But that's now recommendation 2.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
So with those changes, and I hope everybody's clear about those amendments. Are there any queries about them? No. Could we go to a vote on the amended recommendation? Now, there were 2 recommendations. Everyone is in favour. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Sarah, to you for all the work you've put into it. As you said, you have real passion for this subject. That was demonstrated again this evening, but your passion and drive has helped to move this forward. So I think we're all in your debt. Thank you. Now we're going to move to item 53 on your agenda. It's on page 205, and this is Bowant Wokingham School Sixth Form options and recommendations. And Prue will be leading on this.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. So it's been a long and winding road, but we have finally got to the point of making a decision on Bowhunt Sixth Form. There have been a lot of discussions with the trust. I think the relationship with them has improved as time has gone on, and we have had some very fruitful discussions. We've reached a position where I think we're clear that, as we were not clear in July when we looked at this, that this is the best option. We did leave the 2 options open in July to make sure that we were going to get the best value for money option. And I think the report makes it clear that the proposal that we've got, which is to build an extension and not go with the other building, is actually the best value for money. We have secured, along with the Sixth Form, some additional places in years 7 to 11, and also some additional SEND provision, which is really very helpful for us as a council for the children and young people in the borough. There are 4 recommendations, and the last one is to delegate authority to us to in consultation with Graham and Helen to enter into the agreement at the end. Just make it clear that we've put a budget in, and there's a shared risk on that budget. It'll be shared equally, and Graham would shoot me if I didn't make that clear. So I just ask you to vote for it, and then Bowhunt can have a Sixth Form.
Thank you very much, Prue. I'm sure Graham wouldn't shoot you, but I think it is important that that is mentioned. And can I just say, just as I thanked Sarah, I want to thank you, and also the officers in Children's Services and Resources and Assets and Planning, who have all helped try and move this to the conclusion it's reached now. It's been, as you said, a long and tortuous process. with a lot of very difficult conversations along the way, but we have got, I think, to an acceptable solution which should satisfy the school, but also will help the council meet its obligations in terms of school places. So thank you very much for all the work you've put in. Without any further ado, can I go to the vote on this item? All those in favour, please show. And that again is unanimous. Thank you very much, everyone. And now we move on to item 54 on our agenda, and I think this is Lindsay is required to leave for this item. Thank you, Lindsay. We will send somebody to call you back in when we're finished. Item 54 is promotion of Woking and Borough Council assets. And you can see the report begins on page 215 of your agenda. I would like to just remind colleagues there is a small amount of material in part 2. No one in any comment they may wish to make should refer to any of that material. And if they are minded to want to do so, well, I'm afraid I have to ask the public to leave the meeting. I'm hoping that will not be necessary. I want to start in my introduction to this item just to make it absolutely clear that this item relates to the council as a landowner making a decision as to which sites it wishes to promote in the local plan process and which sites it wishes to withdraw that had previously been promoted. It does not constitute a planning decision made by the council as the local planning authority. Just a decision by the council as a landowner. And that really is an important point that needs to be made. This is a completely separate process. The final decision on the local plan, which we have talked about on a number of occasions this evening, is one for the whole council, not the executive alone. In making the decision about which sites to promote and for what, the executive will be considering not just capital receipts, important though those undoubtedly are, but the council's corporate priorities and community aspirations. That explains, for instance, why Appendix B of the report promotes Rook's Nest Farm in Barkham as a site for the COVID Memorial Wood and 2 SEND schools, rather than for 250 houses as proposed in the current draft local plan, the one the current administration inherited. There are other changes which you can also see in Appendix B. Now, this is not the place, as I hope made clear, to discuss the local plan as such. But I think Clive, who first suggested the council plant a COVID Memorial Wood, would like to say a few words on that subject, and that subject only. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stephen. I am absolutely delighted that we are proposing to go ahead with the COVID Memorial Wood. The original idea of the COVID Memorial Wood was to provide a very special place in the borough for individuals and their families to gather to remember the loved ones who were sadly lost as a result of the COVID pandemic. So I am really grateful to all of my executive colleagues who have progressed with this idea of the COVID Memorial Wood. And I'm sure that many, many residents now will be very pleased that we're going ahead with it. And in the future, many will be very pleased that they have got somewhere to go to remember people who they sadly lost.
Thank you very much for that, Clive. You're absolutely right that this will provide a wonderful place of quiet contemplation for those who've lost loved ones as a result of the pandemic. But it also, to steal, if I may, Sarah's thunder, will provide a contribution towards helping us address climate emergency, because it will increase canopy cover, which has got to be a good thing. So thank you for that. Oops, as I've already indicated, this is not the place to have a discussion about local plan sites. This is not at the end of the process. Council as a planning authority makes decisions, but the council as a landowner has indicated here which sites it wishes to promote and for what, and which sites it does no longer wishes to promote and why. So with all that in mind, could I ask you all to indicate your support for this set of recommendations? Thank you very much. That again is unanimous. All that is unanimous amongst all those present and able to vote. I think that brings us to an end of our business. So Lindsay can come back in, if only just to join us as we close the meeting. Lindsay, could you just pick that up? Yes, thank you. The second time this evening that my status as leader of the council has been cast into doubt.
Needs a lovely blue tap.
Right, okay. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you very much, members of the public, for coming along to listen to us. I admire your tenacity. And thank you for those who joined us online. And I should have said earlier, and apologies for this, that we were joined online by many of our directors. So I didn't introduce them earlier, which was my fault, and I'm apologies for not doing so. But you're all here, and I'm sure you've been listening, and we're grateful for your presence, albeit remote. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, and good night.